So I mentioned before we started the show, we have Fred Fleitz joining us. He's joined us in the past. I think we have him on video in just a moment, but he is the president of the Center for Security Policy in Washington, D.C., president and CEO. He has a fabulous history in his life. He has served in U.S. national security positions for 25 years in the CIA, the DIA, the Department of State, and the House Intelligence Committee staff. He's a very knowledgeable man in a variety of arenas relating to America's security policy. He was with the Center for Security Policy for a long time, left for a little hiatus to work with John Bolton, came back, and he's now president and CEO. And the reason I want him to join us today is because there's a new book out from the Center for Security Policy called Defending Against Biothreats. It is a most timely book responding directly to the COVID-19 crisis and the virus that came from China and all the different issues arising out of and what we Americans should be learning from defending the biothreat we've all faced because of COVID-19. So I believe we have Fred Fleitz on the phone. Hi, Fred.
Hey, Debbie, good to be here.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're available to join me today. Okay, so before you show the book, I want to just tell this one thing. I think I saw it on your Facebook page or someone else's. But this book, again, Defending Against Biothreats, is now #1 in nonfiction on Amazon. Is that right?
I understand it's the #1 nonfiction terrorism title.
Terrorism,
but
okay.
We're still very happy with that.
I'm thrilled with it. I mean, it is huge because it is a very substantive book. Every chapter written by experts, most of these names you would know. I'm going to go through the chapters, but it is filled with expertise and substantive expertise. And this is the one thing I want to say. Well, first of all, Fred, why don't you show our listeners the book? I think you have it right there. That's what it looks like.
I have it, Defending Against Biothreats. We released it on Monday, and I'm very proud of it. It's something that looks at the current coronavirus crisis, but also looks at what our government needs to be doing to defend against future crises like this and what our enemies learn from our biosecurity weaknesses and how they may exploit them.
Absolutely. And you know, the chapters, I mentioned the chapters are so timely. And before I dive into those, first of all, I love that you did this. But second, as one thing I always have said to your predecessor, Frank Gaffney, and you as head of Center for Security Policy, the reason I love your organization, a lot of people recognize a problem. Obviously, coronavirus is a big problem. Recognize that it came from China. Recognize we have concerns about bioweapons and concerns about where it actually came from and all the questions that relate to our security. But a lot of people will wring their hands and just discuss how, isn't this terrible? And, you know, we should do something about this. And I love the Center for Security Policy. You just leap into action, address the issues, find someone who is an expert, and not just simply explain what happened, but are forward thinking enough to think, how are we going to deal with this? What are we going to do so these things don't happen in the future? This isn't the only issue you guys have done this on. So I love your organization for that quality. It's forward thinking. It is assertively defending America. So I just want to commend Center for Security Policy for doing this book.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so sir, everyone got so panicked about this and still is panicked about this this threat. So you have this Defending Against Biothreats book. You start with the chapter about the trail leading back to the Wuhan labs. And that was by Jim, and I think his last name is pronounced Garrity, right? Garrity?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you have a quick notion what he's trying to talk about? Is it that we need to dig in, or is it that we already know where it came from, or we don't know yet? Do you know that information?
Well, National Review was kind enough to allow us to reprint a fabulous article by Jim Garrity in which he does an incredible deep dive on how this virus seems to have come out of a high security biolab in Wuhan, China. And he talks about the various Chinese individuals who are working there. And he has some details people aren't aware of about how this lab, not only was it engaged in research into bat viruses, and we're pretty sure the coronavirus is a bat virus, but he has job advertisements that were distributed outside of China trying to get people to come to this laboratory to experiment on dangerous bat viruses. And he gives a very good introduction to understand where this virus came from, and information that I think we can be pretty sure the Chinese government is well aware of and is trying to cover up.
Yeah, that last part about the Chinese government well aware of and trying to cover up, it could not be more true. I mean, there's been so much commentary about how they misled the World Health Organization, or maybe the World Health Organization knew exactly what was happening. But in any case, we weren't getting a square story out of the World Health Organization from the very beginning. And I love that someone dug in to talk about how it came from China and where it came from. So then also, before I go into all these, I want to be sure and mention, so your organization, Center for Security Policy, aren't you doing a series of webinars so people can actually listen to the authors of these various chapters? Did I read that correctly?
We are. We're doing a 5-part biosecurity webinar series. It started today. It started yesterday with Gordon Chang, who wrote on China's responsibility for the virus and what the Chinese government really knew, and Claudia Rosette, who writes about how the World Health Organization helped the Chinese cover up the virus. That was our first one. I believe our next one is going to be on July 27th, and in that webinar, we're going to have Dr. Ken Alabek. He's a former Soviet biological weapons scientist. He wrote 2 chapters in the book with his colleague, and he has some really interesting perspectives comparing, and I might add, this guy developed biological weapons for the Soviet Union. He compares his experiences working on those deadly pathogens with the coronavirus, how they might be weaponized, and what we need to do to defend against this threat.
Oh my gosh, so valuable. I love that. So are these the kind of things, I don't know what these webinars, are they the kind of thing that any member of the public can sign up for, or are they really for supporters of Center for Security Policy?
Anyone can sign up. If you go to our website, securefreedom.org, we have an article on our site that gives the dates of all these webinars, and you can either watch them online afterwards, or you can sign up to watch them while they're live. And if you do that, you can ask the panelists questions about what they're discussing.
I just love how proactive that is, how people can tune in, they can listen to the experts, and as you say, if they're ahead of time, they may even be able to ask a question. I love that, and I love that you have things up later. Your website, you mentioned you get to it, securefreedom.org. That is for Center for Security Policy.org. You have so many great experts. You mentioned Gordon Chang, and he was just on the show a couple weeks ago, and he's wonderful too, but he's really good at talking about how the Chinese Communist Party very willing to cover this up, even after they recognize it's a pretty serious problem. So I guess he elaborates on that in this chapter.
Nobody's been tougher on the Chinese government about the virus than Gordon Chang. He's a friend of mine. He doesn't pull his punches. And basically what he says is Chinese leadership knew or should have known that their actions would result in the whole world being infected by this virus. He seems to think that the Chinese government deliberately infected the world. I'm not quite there yet, but I know a lot of people in Washington that's their belief, that the Chinese government knowingly let this virus spread around the world. But Gordon goes through chapter and verse about how this developed, the appalling cover-up by the Chinese government, and Chinese doctors and medical workers who tried to warn the government about this and were punished. Some of them died. Some of them just disappeared.
The famous, they were disappeared. Yeah, I love, Gordon Chang is fabulous talking about China, his knowledge, not just about the current Chinese Communist Party leadership, but the history of China, the thinking inside the Chinese mindset, really some of it going back as far as a long time ago about this world domination goal some people have embraced within China's leadership. They are supposed to be the race that rules the world. He's gone through that several times on my show. So fabulous. I saw Rosemary Gibson did a chapter, and she's the one, is this the same woman who wrote the book, China RX, that was talking about, yeah. Do you want to just talk a little bit about what she's talking about?
Well, among the things we have to do to stop another coronavirus pandemic crisis is to stop our reliance on China for critical medicines and medical supplies. And there are bills in Congress right now to bring this production home. And we know that in the middle of the pandemic, when we were criticizing China, China threatened to cut off supplies of these drugs and medical supplies. That has to end.
It was truly egregious. And her book, China RX, came out before the coronavirus came along. And even then, she was raising alarm bells saying America is too dependent on China for various vital medications, and that when you get things in America, often in doctor's offices or hospitals or pharmacies, you just don't even consider where they were made. But many of the American pharmaceutical companies are actually doing the manufacturing in China. So it was a brilliant book when she first brought that out before the coronavirus. But I thought about her when the coronavirus came along. She's going to have a lot to say, and I'm sure she does, a lot to say about why we are continuing to rely on China for medications or any kind of. Yeah.
During one of our webinars, Frank Gaffney will be interviewing Rosemary Gibson just about this subject.
Oh, it's so good. Okay, I also know I should have Claudia Rosette, she was on my show years ago. She's so brilliant. I mean, everyone in this book is brilliant, to be clear, but she's so brilliant. So I thought she goes into the idea about how the Chinese communist virus was handled at the World Health Organization. And as I was mentioning earlier, there's a lot of suspicion about whether China duped the World Health Organization, or the World Health Organization was well aware that China was misleading them. But she dives in, I'm going to assume, and tries to ferret out what happened inside the World Health Organization. Is that right?
Claudia is an award-winning journalist. We're happy to have her. She knows a lot about the UN, and she just talks about how China has colonized the World Health Organization. They helped the current director general named Tedros to get this job. He's incompetent. He was incompetent when he worked in Somalia on various health jobs. He's been working and carrying water for the Chinese government since he got in there, and he's deliberately helped China put forward its false narrative on the origins of the virus. He's been quick to criticize President Trump for travel bans. He has no criticism of the Chinese government.
That is truly astonishing. It's truly astonishing. Okay, and this next chapter, I will tell you, I just downloaded the book on my iPad. Skim. I am going to dive in and read this because every one of these chapters sounds so just so helpful. But the next one was The Lessons Terrorists Will Draw from the Coronavirus Pandemic. That was Charles Faddis who wrote this one. I have to tell you, I've had that thought. The kind of things that you wake up worrying about is as America looks weak, as we flounder, as we don't react as a strong country, this is what terrorists begin to surmise about the character of our country. Is that where he's roughly going with this? Do you know?
We have two chapters in this, one by Sam Farris, one by Shoshana Bryan and her husband, Stephen Bryan. And they talk about what terrorists have learned from this. But you got to read Faddis's chapter very carefully, because he talks about how security problems at biological laboratories in researching very dangerous pathogens are weak. Now, we've heard reports of problems with security at Chinese biolabs in Wuhan, but there are problems with security at American labs. I don't know if you knew that the high-level biolab at Fort Detrick was shut down last year for security problems. In 2014, vials of smallpox that were left over were found at a laboratory in Bethesda, Maryland, a government laboratory. Faddis's point is that if security at American biolabs are this weak, what's the story at sensitive laboratories around the world? The terrorists won't have to make these pathogens. They can steal them because the security is inadequate.
That's a truly horrible thought. That is a truly horrific thought. And so I will definitely enjoy both those chapters. You also have one here called Understanding the Bioweapons Threat, Its Implications for Defense Against Natural Epidemics. And so really just responding to something that wasn't maybe cooked up in a lab. But we should be learning every time Americans, our healthcare system, our medical system, every time we have a threat like this, we should be learning new things. And I assume that's roughly what they're getting at in this chapter, or do you?
Yeah, this chapter by Ken Alabak, he's the former Soviet biological weapons scientist, and Albina Touche, his colleague. This chapter and the next one both basically look at the coronavirus epidemic and talk about how to prepare defense, which is extremely difficult, especially for a virus that has asymmetric carriers. But he also folds in his experience working in the Soviet biological weapons program. He compares the coronavirus to smallpox, which is another pathogen that is easily transmissible, person to person. His chapter is very technical, but we didn't write this. We wrote this book for a number of audiences, and one are for high-level U.S. policymakers who need to really double down and put in place measures to prevent this from happening again. And there's so much we have to do.
So much. Yeah. Okay. You have 3 more chapters, and I will just tell what they are: International Biological Defense Verification, Paula DeSutter, the U.S. Biodefense Strategy in the Time of COVID, Reality and Truths on Policy, Stephen Elliott. Last one, Back to the Future, Biosecurity Lessons from the Late 1990s for the Year of COVID-19. So you've covered a wide gamut, and I want to turn to, I'd love to let you comment on those last 3 chapters, but I want to turn to something you also wrote. It's called Decision Brief, Voters Must Demand a Real Bipartisan Strategy for Defense Against Biothreats. So before I get to that, the last 3 chapters, any highlights you want to mention about those last 3 chapters?
They are by 3 government experts who worked in arms control. And I'll just say briefly, they look at what the government and the international community is doing, and they basically say they're not doing much.
Well, that's a bad thing for you to say. Gosh. But I mean, I'm glad you're saying it, but oh my gosh. Well, again, I love the Center for Security Policy dove in and just decided we're not going to just cower in fear or kind of play defense, but this is really this is playing offense. This is saying we're going to dig in, we're going to understand, and then we're going to find ways to fix this, to defend our people. So love that you did this book, and I love that it made Amazon bestseller nonfiction terrorism.
If I could add on the decision brief, this is sort of a summary of what the book is about. We believe that elected officials at all levels, not just the president, but at the state level, the local level, have to do a lot more to solve this crisis. They have to recognize what this crisis is. We have to work in a bipartisan way to solve it. And to be very frank, Debbie, the American voter has to punish politicians who are just using this as a political weapon and are refusing to recognize China's responsible for it, and that we have to work together in a bipartisan manner to solve it. And I regret in Washington that's not going on right now.
That was actually my next question, is how are we doing inside? I mean, obviously we're in a particularly toxic political environment, so it's very hard, I think, for Americans to envision that whoever has the majority after the fall elections, that you're going to have the parties work together. But if there's anything that ought to inspire everyone, it is something that could be like this virus. It's an equal opportunity killer. It is very dangerous. It doesn't matter what your political views are. And so the idea that you ought to be able to come together on this. So when you say nothing's happening, why is nothing happening yet?
Look, the Democrats, Joe Biden, Schumer, and Pelosi, they won't talk about how China's responsible for this. All they want to do is blame President Trump. There's nothing from them on measures that should be taken to defend the American people, improving our stockpile of medical supplies, looking into where the virus came from in Wuhan. They say nothing about that. All they want to do is use it as a political weapon, and it is endangering this country. The American people have to really say stop. We need to work together on this. This virus isn't Republican or Democrat.
Right. Yeah, equal opportunity killer. So I want to urge our listeners again. I tell you, the only complaint I have, now that I have you on screen, the only complaint I have about the seminars at Center for Security Policy is I can't get to them on show days because I have to be getting ready for this show. But they're so fun to go listen to afterward. And I want to encourage people, if you want to be able to talk about issues with your friends in a more informed way, these are great resources because they're great conversations. They lay out things very clearly, and they're very just vitally important issues. So I really do urge people to go register for these webinars. You're calling them webinars, and you go to Secure Freedom. Yeah, go ahead.
No, they're webinars, and you can register for them on our website, securefreedom.org.
I love that. I urge people to do that. Securefreedom.org. You just feel so informed. And actually, it's a website, as I'm going through preparing for the week shows, trying to think of what will be interesting to talk about this week. It's one of my regular websites I scan because it's so full of great information and a lot of relatively short articles that you can skim pretty easily and get a sense for what the issue is. So, Fred Fleitz, I love this. You want to hold up that book one more time? People should see this.
It's available on Kindle and paperback on Amazon.com right now.
defending against biothreats. It is a really comprehensive, well-informed, and just great thing for everyone to get. So urge people to order that, and I got it on my happy iPad right here. Going to dive into it in the next 4 days. And Fred Fleitz, thank you so much for taking time to join me.
Great to be here. Thanks, Debbie.
Great talking to you, sir. Okay, that's a great organization. You know, I've talked about them a lot in this show, and they actually deserve all of the praise that I give them. They're truly stellar organization. One last kind of closing point about China. I'd meant to say this earlier, but there was actually an incident that I wanted to mention, or two incidents. One was in Houston, just happening over this, maybe yesterday or 2 days ago, which was that the Americans, our government had ordered the Chinese embassy in Houston to close, and because they were concerned about security. And then there was a fire reported in the courtyard of this Chinese embassy in Houston. Fire big enough, apparently documents being burned. Fire big enough that the fire department got called. Unclear how that will all unfold. And the other thing was that the federal government did indict 2 Chinese nationals here in America for allegedly trying to hack in and steal coronavirus research. The Justice Department announced on Tuesday this week charges against 2 Chinese nationals who allegedly tried to steal U.S. coronavirus research and proprietary information from corporations and the government. I have to tell you, if we get to healthcare solutions, more healthcare solutions that are going to help us deal with the coronavirus, this is a great thing. I hope we share it with the world. But we have to, in this country, every time there's an effort to hack, especially by the Chinese, they need to know we are watching. We are not going to permit it to happen. We are savvy enough to be on top of it, and we're not going to let these people, steal secrets through cybersecurity in America. We're going to arrest them and prosecute them, as we are doing.